Aw, I'm Sophie. My sister once looked me in the eye and said, "You'll always be family." A month later, she signed her name on the papers that took my house and my fiancé. He smiled while doing it. With Amelia sneered, her words a dagger in my heart. They emptied my accounts, sold my car, threw a party in my home without me. But the part that still burns, they did it with wine glasses in hand, like betrayal was something to celebrate. "To our new life," Daniel toasted, his smirk searing my memory. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just got quiet and started collecting proof. Before we dive in, tell me what time are you listening and where from? Drop it in the comments because what you're about to hear is how silence built the kind of revenge they never saw coming. The casserole was bubbling in the oven, filling the kitchen with the smell of thyme and cream. I wiped my hands on the apron. Blue, faded, the one with the tiny pocket my niece used to hide Cheerios in when she was little. For once, it was quiet in the house. My house, the one I'd bought after 12 years of working double shifts, weekends, and giving up every vacation. The porch still creaked where I'd painted it last summer. The plumbing had given me hell that autumn, but I fixed it myself with a flashlight and YouTube videos. It was Saturday afternoon in Portland, late summer. The sun spilled through the kitchen window and danced across the pale tile. It should have been a peaceful morning. I'd invited my sister and fiancé over for brunch, just a simple family moment. I set the table carefully, trying not to show how much I cared about the details. Everything matched. Everything was mine. Then, Amelia arrived. Her voice came from the door, too loud for the quiet. "Wow, Sophie," she said, glancing around like a realtor doing a walkthrough. "This house will be perfect for entertaining. It's practically ours already," she added, her tone smile. "Thanks. Took me a while to get it the way I wanted." She gave a non-committal hum, her eyes already drifting toward the living room. She hadn't noticed the framed print of Grandma's handwriting above the fireplace. Or maybe she just didn't care. She walked in like she owned the place. Daniel followed shortly after. He kissed my cheek quickly, barely making eye contact. "Hey," he said, pulling out his phone before I could respond. "You're so predictable, Sophie," he muttered, his voice cold, dismissive. My stomach tightened. He wasn't usually like that. Not that cold, not that distracted. I told myself he was stressed, maybe something at work, maybe he and Amelia had argued on the way over, maybe I was being paranoid. But Amelia kept commenting on everything like she was already redesigning it. "You could knock out this wall and open up the kitchen completely," she said casually, sipping the coffee I'd made. "Have you thought about hardwood floors?" "It's so outdated," she sneered, her words a jab at my efforts. "It's not a flip," I said, trying to sound amused. She tilted her head, smiling. "Of course. You wouldn't understand style," she added, her smile venomous. Daniel didn't say much, just sat by the window, scrolling, occasionally glancing at something and smirking. He wasn't present. I kept trying to meet his eyes, but he avoided mine. Still, I didn't say anything. I served the food, I asked about work, I refilled mugs like I hadn't noticed. After they left, I stood at the sink, rinsing plates that weren't even dirty. My fingers moved on autopilot. And then I heard Amelia's voice in my head again. "Is your name still on the deed?" She'd asked it lightly, almost as a joke. I'd laughed, said, "Of course it is," but her tone had rattled me. And Daniel had shrugged. "We sorted the paperwork, babe. It's just easier with one name." "That stuff. You don't need to worry," he'd said, his tone patronizing, deceptive. I didn't remember signing anything, but I'd been so busy the past few weeks, planning the wedding, picking up extra shifts, handling appointments he didn't have time for. Maybe I had signed something without looking. Maybe it was easier. But that chill when they exchanged that glance told me something wasn't right. They're plotting something, I thought, my instincts screaming betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I called my friend Laura in Salem, said I needed to clear my head. I stayed at her place overnight, no big deal. I left Daniel a note. Just needed a breather. I said I didn't mention Amelia. I didn't mention the deed. When I got back the next day, my neighbors waved strangely at me. One of them, Mrs. Thompson, asked, "Oh, Oh, you're still here? What do you mean? I asked. She hesitated, clutching her Pomeranian a little tighter. I thought you'd moved. Your sister and that man had people over yesterday. Big crowd. Looked like a farewell thing. They were celebrating your absence, she added, her voice uneasy, sympathetic. I didn't answer, just smiled. My hands were shaking. I walked into my own home, and it didn't smell like me. It smelled like perfume I didn't wear and wine I didn't drink. The cushions were fluffed differently. My grandmother's Afghan wasn't on the couch. A framed photo of me and Dad at Yosemite was gone. And then I saw it. A plastic cup on the counter. Amelia's housewarming bash written in silver marker. I opened the fridge. Half the casserole I'd made was gone. So was the sparkling cider I'd bought for my anniversary. I walked the house like a stranger. In the guest bedroom, I found someone had slept in the bed. My robe hung behind the door, but my slippers were gone. Daniel's shoes weren't where he normally left them. It was like the house was in limbo. Part his, part Amelia's, and mine only in memory. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the cold tile. I whispered to myself, I'm still here. This is still mine for now. They won't erase me, I vowed, my voice steady, resolute. I opened the garage door slowly, expecting to see the same cluttered mess I'd left in. Old paint cans, a box of Christmas lights I kept meaning to sort. My bike leaned against the corner wall. But something felt different the second the door creaked open. The air was colder. Little, like no one had been in there for years, and yet everything was wrong. Half the garage was empty. My vintage Schwinn bike gone. So was the RID filing cabinet that had been there since the day I moved in. I used to joke it held my whole life. Tax records, insurance files, car title, house deed. Receipts from every repair I'd paid out of pocket. It was the one place I kept everything I couldn't afford to lose, and now it was just space. I stood there, frozen, blinking at the spot where the cabinet used to be. I checked behind the water heater, then near the tool shelves. Nothing, not even a single drawer or folder out of place because it had all been taken. A sick knot twisted in my stomach. This wasn't just disorganization. This whole night's stolen my life, I whispered, the realization a gut punch. Without taking my coat off, I rushed inside to my office, my small corner room that smelled of paper and old lavender. It still looked the same, but when I opened the file boxes, I could feel it. Someone had been here. The tabs were bent, the color-coded labels were mixed up, my folders had been pulled out, handled roughly, shoved back in the wrong order. And then I noticed none of Daniel's documents were missing. His business receipts, lease agreement from before we moved in together, passport still there, tucked in his locked drawer. But my side empty. Car documents, house title, even the folder labeled day. Some assets gone. I picked up my phone and texted him. Where's the red cabinet? Why are all my documents missing? No answer. I called him straight to voicemail. I sat down at my desk, trying to stay calm, but my fingers were trembling. I typed Portland County Title Office into Google and called the number. Hi. I need to check on a property. It's mine. I mean, it was mine. I just need to see the file. The woman on the line was polite but hesitant. Do you have the parcel number? I gave her the address. She paused. Just a moment, please. I waited. It felt like an hour. The silence stretched thin across my nerves. When she came back, her tone had shifted. Subtle, but enough. It looks like the property was refinanced 2 months ago under a new agreement. What? I whispered. That's not possible. I never signed any. It's notarized under a business entity called Mart Holdings. The primary on file is Daniel Evans. The secondary is Amelia Carter. My throat went dry. That's my sister. They've betrayed me, I thought, the words of bitter truth. There was a pause. I'm afraid your name isn't on the current deed. I nearly dropped the phone. I hung up without another word and stared at the wall 2 months ago. So I could focus on my job. I hadn't thought twice about it. He'd always said legal stuff stressed me out. I grabbed the iMac on our shared desk, clicked into his account. Same password it had always been. I opened his folders. At first, everything looked normal. Wedding planning spreadsheets, photos from a friend's bachelor party. some design files for his side project. But then I found a folder named Wedding Budget Final. Inside, buried under tax estimates and invoices, was a single PDF. I clicked. It was a scanned loan document on bank letterhead with my name and signature at the bottom. At first glance, it looked real, but something was off. The signature wasn't mine. Not the curl in the S, not the tail of the E. It was similar, but too clean, like someone had traced it. I scrolled further. There, in the fine print, was the clause that turned my stomach. Vehicle listed as collateral, 2019 Subaru Forester, VIN ending in 39101. That was my car. The only left that still felt like mine. A sudden panic hit me. I ran to the front window. The driveway was empty. I pulled open the door, ran out to the street. It wasn't parked anywhere. I hadn't driven it back from Laura's. Daniel had dropped me off that morning, and now it was gone. They've taken everything, I gasped, my heart pounding with rage. Back inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the center of the living room next to the sofa where we'd once dreamed out loud about kids, renovations, growing old. It all felt fake now. I sank to the floor and just broke. There were no words for this kind of betrayal. It wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was careful, methodical, like I'd been edited out of my own life. What hurt more than the theft was the realization that it hadn't been one person. It was two. My sister, my fiancé together. They hadn't just taken things. They'd taken me out of the picture, and then my phone buzzed. A text from Amelia, 4 words. Can we talk soon? I stared at those 4 words like they were written in fire. Can we talk soon? You've got some nerve, I muttered, my anger flaring. For a moment, I almost responded. Almost. But instead, I set the phone down on the kitchen counter and just stood there. The silence around me wasn't empty. It felt like it was pressing in, and without warning, my mind yanked me backward back to that rooftop brunch. It was 2 months ago, the Saturday before Amelia's wedding, late summer, just like now. Portland was breezy that morning. Blue sky, pink tablecloths fluttering, champagne flutes catching the sun. Everyone was dressed in pastels. Amelia had insisted on a French garden party theme, and I'd complied, wearing a lavender wrap dress she'd picked out for me herself. I thought it was about love, family, celebration. Turns out it might have been a goodbye party for my house. I remember handing the caterer the final account that day. I'd written it from my personal account. Amelia hadn't even thanked me, just waved distractedly before dragging Daniel toward the mimosa station. "You're so generous, Sophie," she'd said, her tone dripping with mockery. They looked like the picture of joy. Daniel wore that smug little half-smile he always did when he was playing nice for company. "You're making this too easy," he'd whispered to Amelia, thinking I couldn't hear. Amelia was in full bloom, laughing, tossing her hair back, surrounded by women who adored her. I was her only sister, and I felt like a... But then she turned to me, walked over, her perfume hit first. There's a metallic underneath. She hugged me tight, whispered, "I'm so glad you're part of the family now." "You'll always be my sister," she'd added, her words a calculated lie. I'd smiled. Of course I did. That's what I'd been waiting for all my life. Acceptance, belonging. Now, standing in my kitchen, I wondered if that hug had been a distraction, a sleight of hand, if it was her way of saying goodbye. You just don't know it yet. Me for a fool, I thought, the betrayal burning. I grabbed my keys and headed out. I needed air, something that didn't smell like betrayal. The co-op store was 10 minutes away. I didn't go in. I just parked, turned the engine off, and stared through the windshield like I was waiting for some answer to show up in the raindrops on the glass. That's when my phone rang. Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Voicemail received. I hesitated, then pressed play. His voice came through shaky, too controlled. It's not what you think. I swear, it's complicated. Can we talk just once, please? You don't understand, he pleaded, his tone desperate, fake. He paused. My heart thudded. Then a woman's voice in the background, light, familiar. Tell her that part later. Amelia. She was with him right then, not in a separate house, not across town, together. You're both liars, I whispered, my rage boiling over. I closed my eyes, played it again, slower. There was no mistaking her voice. It wasn't just the house, it wasn't just the car, it wasn't just the title. It was me. They'd made me into a mark, someone to charm, use, erase. I didn't cry, not this time. I opened my messages app, typed out one line. You two deserve each other, but not what you took from me. Sent. This isn't over, I vowed, my resolve hardening. Back home, I didn't take my coat off. I walked straight into the den, pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk, and found the notebook I used to track home expenses. I hadn't touched it in weeks. It was dusty, but it opened easily. I turned to a fresh page. Wrote the date, then, last time I physically saw the deed, 2 months ago before Amelia's bridal brunch. Final catering check $7,000, 0 cents paid by me, refinance filing date per title office 2 days after the brunch, signature on new loan forged. Vehicle collateral contract unauthorized. Company listed a Mart Holdings registered to Amelia, shared documents stored on iMac. I didn't even pause. Each line sharpened my focus. This wasn't journaling. This was documentation. I flipped to a second page. Daniel's business license suspended last year, no active income since October. Used my accounts for household bills. Filed joint planning documents for wedding, but kept vendor contracts in his name. I sat back, staring at the list. It wasn't grief anymore, it was clarity. They hadn't just fooled me. They'd built this together. Quietly, carefully, knowing I'd never question them, knowing I'd believe family wouldn't do that. They underestimated me, I thought, my mind racing with strategy. I stood up, walked to the hall closet, opened a little wooden box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was an old USB drive marked in faded Sharpie, Taxes 2019-2022, Daniel's files. Back then, I used to organize everything for him, scanned receipts, emails, spreadsheets. He always said I was the brains behind his business mess. Well, it turns out I'd been keeping backups of the whole crime scene. Amelia stood at my front door like nothing had happened. Her hair was perfectly pinned, makeup effortless. In one hand, she held a pastry box from Monique's, the kind with velvet ribbon and gold foil. Her other hand hovered like she was about to knock again. I opened the door just as she whispered, "I brought cake." No greeting, no apology, just sugar. We sat across from each other in the corner booth at Rosewood Cafe downtown, a place we used to love before her wedding planner turned it into a bridal meeting zone. The sun filtered through the arched windows, casting soft light over polished marble and clinking cups. She slid the pastry box across the table without meeting my eyes. "I thought we should talk. Clear the air. You owe me that much," she said, her tone falsely sweet, manipulative. I didn't touch the box, didn't even glance at it. My hand stayed folded on the table. "You should have texted sooner," I said, "before I found your voice in the background," her mouth pressed into a line. She looked out the window and back at me, voice syrupy smooth. "I didn't know what Daniel was doing, Soph. He told me you were leaving the city, that you didn't want the house anymore." "You're better off without it," she lied, her eyes avoiding mine. I raised an eyebrow. "And that made sense to you?" She smiled tight. "He said you needed a fresh start. I believed him." "You're too naive to understand," she added, her condescension cutting. I let the silence stretch between us, watched her sip her lavender latte, perfectly composed. "You're still family," she added, almost like an afterthought. "I never stopped seeing you that way. You're lying through your teeth," I thought, her words a hollow facade. I leaned forward. "You saw me enough to help him transfer the house out of my name." She blinked. There it was. A flicker, a crack. I thought it was for the best. "For whom? For you, of course," she said, her voice trembling, her lie crumbling. She didn't answer. The waitress dropped off a second cup of coffee. I didn't answer. The waitress dropped off a second cup of coffee. I didn't touch it. I stared at the pastries. Almond tarts, lemon chiffon, things she knew I used to love, but I'd lost my appetite the minute I read the forged signature. She shifted in her seat, reaching for her phone, probably checking the time or scanning for an exit. "You don't get to backpedal now, Amelia. Not after this." "What are you talking about?" she said, blinking wide like she just walked onto the stage of a play she forgot she was in. I looked her straight in the eye. "Daniel's new condo? The one he's building?" I never mentioned that to you. Her face froze just for a beat. Enough, he tried. I shook my head. You only know because you were involved in the title transfer. You helped move it all into his LLC. Her fingers tightened around her mug. She didn't deny it. She didn't even pretend anymore. The waitress came back to check on us. Everything okay here? Amelia smiled with all her teeth. Yes, thank you. Once we were alone again, I opened my purse and pulled out a manila folder. I didn't slide it over yet. I waited until she reached for another pastry cabinet, and then I placed it right in front of her. Inside, copies of the quitclaim deed notarized a day before Amelia's bridal brunch. My signature forged, Daniel's name front and center. Her hand hovered midair. This is fraud, I said calmly as a judge, and I'm filing. You'll pay for this, I said, my voice steady, unyielding. She went pale. Not dramatic, just a shade quieter in the cheeks, like someone realizing the cameras are still rolling. Sophie, not here, she hissed, glancing at the couple beside us. You can't hide anymore, I replied, my tone cold, resolute. Oh, now it matters who's watching. She swallowed hard. For the first time, she looked like the weight of what she'd done was cracking her designer mask. She stood fast, too fast. The chair screeched across the tile. A few heads turned. Thank you for the coffee, I said quietly. She didn't reply. She just grabbed her bag and walked out, heels clacking across the marble like she was late to a meeting. I stayed, finished my coffee, opened my email app, and clicked on the draft I'd written at midnight 2 nights ago. Subject: Property theft and fraudulent transfer. Please see attached documents for preliminary review. I would like to move forward with legal action immediately. I hit send. This is just the beginning, I thought, my resolve ironclad. Then I sat back and watched the foam settle in the bottom of my cup. Amelia always thought appearances would save her, that so long as she wore the right dress and said the right words, people would forgive anything. But truth doesn't need frosting. The envelope landed on Daniel's desk like a hammer. His co-workers were mid-lunch when the woman approached. Former admin assistant, gray suit, hair pinned back, the same woman he'd fired without notice 2 months earlier, claiming budget cuts. She handed him the papers and said clearly, "You've been served." "You can't run from this," she added, her voice firm, echoing my intent. The room went quiet. Meanwhile, I was standing at my kitchen counter in a rental apartment that smelled like paint and detergent, the kind of place you stay in when you don't know where home is anymore. My lawyer called minutes later. "We found something," he said. "You might want to sit." I lowered myself onto a bar stool, heart in my throat. "There's a revised will from your grandfather. It names you as the sole inheritor of the house, but with a stipulation. You had to be present during the signing." "I was," I whispered. "He made me tea that day. I was sitting right next to him." He sighed. "It was never filed. Your mother said she'd take care of it. Of course she'd." I closed my eyes. "It would have stopped all of this. Maybe that's why it never made it to the clerk's desk," he said, his voice lower now. "You think she forgot or decided?" She betrayed me too, I thought, the realization a fresh wound. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. That night, I lay on the thin mattress of the rental's guest bed, scrolling through my phone to distract myself. I hadn't checked social media in days. I didn't want to see their faces, but curiosity had a cruel edge. The first thing that popped up was a video, a rooftop party, the kind with string lights and fake laughter. Daniel raised a glass. Amelia leaned into his side, holding a coupe of champagne like it was an extension of her perfectly sculpted hand. To fresh starts, she laughed, and to knowing when to let go. To a racing Sophie, she'd whispered, her voice barely audible but caught on camera. There were cheers, a clink of glasses, and in the background, blurry but unmistakable, was my car, the one with the cherry red fender and the dent from our trip to Olympic National Park, parked in the reserved valet line behind them. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. That car wasn't mine anymore. The name on the registration had been changed. My hand tightened around the phone. I sat it down, sat there still. Then I walked out to my own car, the one I was now borrowing from a cousin, and drove. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't bring a plan. I drove past midnight, windows down, through the back roads of Portland and into the hills. I needed air, but more than that, I needed a place where nothing had been touched. I ended up outside the home I grew up in. The porch light was on. My mother's light was always on, no matter the hour. But I didn't ring the bell. I slipped around the side under the creaky wood eaves and pulled open the old screen door to my childhood bedroom. The lock was still busted. No one had fixed it in years. Inside, everything was smaller than I remembered. But the scent hadn't changed. Vanilla, cedar, and dust. My books still lined the shelf. The quilt was folded at the foot of the bed. I sat there on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, until the sun began to touch the blinds. Eventually, I stood and opened the closet. Behind old coats and forgotten boots, I found a shoebox. I pulled it out and opened it slowly, like some part of me already knew what waited inside. On top, a Polaroid, me, Amelia, Daniel, standing in front of the fireplace, arms looped, grinning like fools. Back when I thought they were family. I held it for a long time, let the silence fill the corners of the room. Then I tore it in half. Not out of anger, but as a marker. An ending. This is my new beginning, I thought. The act, a quiet declaration. By afternoon, I had driven back to the rental, changed clothes, made tea. Then I opened my laptop and created a folder on my desktop. I named it Reclaiming Everything, and one by one I started uploading mortgage records, backups of Daniel's contracts, screenshots, emails, everything I had once organized for him. Everything he thought I'd never keep. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to build. By Monday morning, my hands were... They thought I was licking my wounds. They thought I was defeated. Drifting somewhere in a sad Airbnb, crying into the same bottle of Chardonnay I'd left half full 2 weeks ago. But I wasn't quiet. I was preparing. At 8:03 a.m. I sat across from Carol, a senior manager at the bank Daniel and I once shared. She pushed a folder across the table with the kind of professionalism reserved for murder scenes. "You're not going to like this," she said gently. I opened it. The receipt was there. Tiffany & Co. Platinum setting, round-cut diamonds, 7,000 and change. Date: 2 weeks before our engagement, paid with our joint account, signed with my name. Digital, but wrong. Too smooth, too clean. "Who was it shipped to?" I asked. She hesitated. "Amelia Carter, at a downtown mailing center." Of course. I stared at the paper long enough for the numbers to blur. Daniel had proposed with a placeholder ring, something simple for now, while the real one, the one that was meant to be mine, had landed on my sister's hand. He gave her my future, I thought, the betrayal a searing wound. "You want a printed copy?" Carol asked. "No," I said, folding the receipt in half. "I want this to be Exhibit A. They'll pay for this," I vowed, my voice steady, determined. Later that day, I walked into the county title office like a woman on jury duty, focused, purposeful, emotionless. Damon, my real estate attorney, met me in the lobby. He looked more alive than I'd seen him since this mess began. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. We went into a records room lined with beige metal file drawers. An assistant pulled up the title logs on a large monitor. There it was. The My House, My Home, had been sold to an LLC named Prairie Cove Holdings. "Shell company," Damon muttered. "No phone number, no website, address." He squinted. I leaned forward. "Is that Brinley & Co.? That's Amelia's friend's brokerage firm, which means she was in on it start to finish." My stomach coiled. The listing had already gone live again, but this time it had been renovated. New backsplash, updated fixtures, photos edited within an inch of reality. I clicked through. They'd staged it with fake furniture, but I knew that hardwood floor, that front door. I saw the spot in the hallway where my father had once patched drywall for me. I saw the corner where I'd hung my grandmother's embroidered frame. Gone. The money trail was easy to follow. Wire transfers from the sale led to an offshore account under Daniel's name, opened just 3 days before he got down on one knee. Damon exhaled. "You want to go public yet?" "Not yet," I said, "but I want them to know I'm watching." They'll feel my shadow soon, I thought, my plan taking shape. Friday evening, I pulled on a black jumpsuit and flat lipstick, no shimmer, no smile. Amelia was throwing herself a pre-engagement celebration on a rooftop downtown because apparently the first round hadn't been enough. I didn't RSVP. I just walked in. The bartender blinked when he saw me. Water, please, I said. Daniel was talking to someone across the room when he noticed me. He froze mid-sentence. The glass in his hand tilted slightly. I walked straight toward him, close enough to smell the citrus cologne I'd once picked out for him. Nice venue, I said quietly. Would be a shame if the IRS showed up asking about undeclared wire transfers. You're finished, I whispered, my voice a quiet threat. He opened his mouth, but I slipped a folded napkin into his breast pocket before he could speak, written in my neat handwriting. I know everything, sleep well. I turned and walked out. Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table, a bowl of oatmeal growing cold beside me. My legal team gathered around. No frills, no ceremony, just coffee, laptops, and folders thick with the kind of truth you can't erase. Elise, a paralegal in her 50s with an accent that cut like truth, stared across the table. You ready to go nuclear? They deserve it, she said, her voice firm, encouraging. I met her gaze. I've been quiet long enough. It's time they face the truth, I replied, my resolve unyielding. The ballroom shimmered under golden lights, each crystal reflecting like it had something to say. Everyone was dressed to impress, champagne flutes in hand, laughter weaving through the hum of violins and slow jazz, and I walked in just time to hear the tail end of her voice bouncing off the chandeliered ceiling. She still came, even after trying to ruin our engagement with fake allegations. She's a liar, Amelia declared, her voice dripping with venom. My heels clicked once against the polished floor, and then I froze. Amelia stood at the center of the room, holding a mic with one hand, the other elegantly gesturing toward me. She smiled like it was all some kind of inside joke. My sister's here, she said again, as if we were part of a heartfelt movie scene, even though she tried to destroy our moment with baseless claims. She's obsessed with tearing us apart, she added, her accusation a public humiliation. Oh! A ripple of gasps passed through the room like a cold wind. One woman clapped. Another stopped midway, unsure. Daniel, standing behind Amelia, gave me the kind of glance you'd give a storm cloud on your wedding day. Then he took the mic. She's obsessed, he said, chuckling lightly, like this was all a misunderstanding. She's having a hard time letting go. It's sad, really. She's pathetic, he sneered, his words a cruel jab. I didn't move. Couldn't. Aunt Ellen turned away. Her husband whispered something in her ear, and she gave him a tight-lipped nod. Someone near the cake table mumbled, "Didn't she get kicked out of her own place?" The blood drained from my face, but I held my ground. Amelia beamed wider and took Daniel's hand. We weren't going to say anything yet. She cooed into the mic, "But we can't hold it in anymore." No, she wouldn't. I'm pregnant. We're starting a new family, she announced, her voice triumphant, her lie a dagger. The room erupted. Applause thundered around me. A waiter popped another bottle of champagne. A camera light flashed straight into my eyes. Daniel grinned. She pulled him in for a photo, her hand resting on her stomach like it was already showing. I stood there, jaw tight, pulse in my ears, pregnant with my fiancé. The lies weren't whispered anymore. They were screamed into microphones. I turned without a word and walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel my legs as they moved beneath me, but in my chest something settled. And it wasn't sadness. It was strategy. You'll regret this, I thought, my mind sharpening with purpose. Outside, I made my way down the marble steps, past valets and murmuring onlookers. I didn't care who saw. My fingers trembled as I unlocked my phone. I scrolled to the voice memos app. I had hit record the moment I walked into the ballroom, and somewhere in that triumphant little speech, Amelia had stumbled. We didn't want to say it yet, but we figured this would make the script surprise more exciting. Script. She had said script. You've exposed yourself, I thought, her slip a gift to my cause. Oh, I played it again, slower. Make the script surprise more exciting. My lips curled, not a smile. A plan. I forwarded the recording to 2 people. First, my attorney with the subject line timeline discrepancy, probable fraud, Second, to Uncle Robert, the family trustee, the one who handled anything connected to our grandfather's estate, the man who once told me, "You're the only one who doesn't posture for my attention." With the audio, I added a short note. "Play this before signing anything." They're finished, I thought, the recording a ticking bomb. The ride home was silent. No music, no tears, just thoughts stretching like highway lines into the night. When I finally reached my rental, I didn't go inside. I opened the trunk, found the shoebox I'd packed from my old bedroom, the one with my old church heels, and the clutch I'd carried at Mom's retirement gala. I took them both out. That night, years ago, Amelia had accidentally spilled wine on the speech I'd written for Mom, then volunteered to give her own toast instead. It was rehearsed, charismatic, and Mom beamed like she was watching a pageant queen win the crown. I never got to speak, but tonight the heels still fit, the clutch still held its shape, and this time I was ready. "I'll speak now," I vowed, my voice steady, determined. The next morning, I arrived at the lawyer's office 15 minutes before anyone else. The receptionist offered coffee, but I declined. My hands were already full with evidence, with years of buried silence, with everything they thought I'd never say out loud. The polished mahogany conference table stretched out before me, the same table where my grandfather had once handed me my first checkbook and told me responsibility is heavier than pride, Sophie, but it'll get you further. I took the seat at the head, not because I needed to, because I earned it. They arrived not long after. Daniel walked in first, his collar stiff and eyes darting. Amelia followed, cool and rehearsed, like she was still the golden girl being announced at a debutante ball. But Uncle Robert wasn't smiling today. He closed the conference room door behind him with a firm click. The attorney, Mr. Peterson, nodded and began, "This meeting is to address the contested transfer of property and review the trust documents previously undisclosed." He barely finished the sentence when Uncle Robert opened a manila folder and slid it across the table right in front of Amelia. "That's the amendment Dad signed before his stroke." Uncle Robert said it was sealed and filed, but never discussed at his request until now. Amelia didn't reach for it. Daniel did. One glance at the top page and color drained from his face. Mr. Peterson adjusted his glasses and read aloud, "In the case of financial fraud or unauthorized transfers involving any shared property where Sophie Carter has contributed more than 50% of value, sole ownership shall revert to her upon verified breach." My fingers didn't twitch. My mouth stayed shut. But inside, everything burned bright. "That includes the house," I said clearly, "and the vehicle and any proceeds made from their illegal sale." Silence. Complete, sharp, cutting silence. Amelia finally spoke. "This is forged," she hissed. "You're desperate." "You're a liar," she screamed, her voice cracking, her facade crumbling. "I notarized it myself. The original is on file with the family trust. You're welcome to challenge it in court, but I wouldn't recommend it," he said, his tone final, unyielding. Daniel looked like he wanted to speak, but his lips just opened and closed like a fish gasping on a countertop. I leaned forward. "There's more." I took out my phone, tapped to a voice memo, placed it on the table, and hit play. Daniel's voice spilled into the room, calm at first, then colder. "Look, I know it's Sophie's house, but she's too nice to press charges. We'll just gaslight her until she gives up." "You're a monster," I said, my voice ringing clear, exposing his cruelty. Someone at the far end of the table gasped. Daniel lunged toward the phone. "You worked at me! You betrayed me!" and looked him dead in the eye. "You recorded yourself? Remember that new phone you bought? You synced it to my iCloud. You never unsynced it when you moved out. You've trapped yourself," I said, my tone cold, triumphant. His jaw clenched, his hands curled. The lawyer's assistant leaned over and calmly said, "We'll need a copy of that file, Ms. Carter." "Already sent," I replied. Amelia's voice had vanished. She didn't even look at me. Instead, she stared at a point on the wall behind me, like she was waiting to wake up from a bad dream. I reached into my purse and pulled out a key, tarnished, engraved with the letters S. I placed it on the table, the key to the home I had bought, loved, and lost. I turned it slowly so it faced Daniel. "Return everything. You don't own me anymore," I said, my voice steady, final. He didn't reach for it. Of course he didn't, because for the first time he realized I wasn't bluffing. Amelia stood abruptly, her chair scraped back so hard it bumped the paneling. "This isn't over," she spat, eyes narrowing. "You'll regret this," she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. I met her gaze with calm. "It was over the moment you called me family and helped steal everything I built. You're finished," I said, my words a quiet verdict. The lawyer raised a hand. "There will be civil proceedings. I suggest you both prepare." I heard the buzz before I saw them. Reporters, at least 2 TV vans had pulled up to the sidewalk. Word had gotten out. For once, I didn't shrink. I stood, smoothed my blouse, and walked out the front door. Not with a speech, not with tears, just a quiet smile. One I hadn't worn in years. The truth speaks for me, I thought, my steps confident, free. 1 month later, the morning sun stretched through the tall, bare windows of my new studio. It warmed the concrete floor, caught on the specks of ink that dotted the counter, and lingered on the wooden workbench like it had always belonged there. There was no shouting in the next room, no one pacing with a glass of wine, rehearsing lies, no one moving my things or replacing my photos with theirs, just light, wood, paper, air. I stood in the center of the room, palms resting on the edge of the table I'd standed and stained myself. The weight in my chest was still there. Grief takes its time, but it no longer dictated my steps. It just rode with me now, quieter than before. Above the workbench, printed in copper plate script on handmade paper, hung the first thing I'd pressed in this space. "Sometimes the ones who call you family are the ones who fear your power most." The words weren't mine. I found them scribbled on a curling sticky note tucked into one of my old journals when I'd finally had the courage to open it again. A paraphrased version of something my grandmother whispered to me the night before she passed. "Keep your name clean, Sophie. One day it'll carry more than you think." She was right. She was always right. The fallout didn't take long. Daniel was disbarred for attempting fraud and misrepresentation. His name disappeared from legal forums and partnership listings faster than he'd ever thought possible. His new firm folded in 2 weeks. Turns out no one wants to do business with someone who tried to steal a house from his fiancé. Amelia wasn't so lucky. Her brokerage license was suspended indefinitely. The civil case was ongoing, but her face had already gone viral. An edited clip from her fake pregnancy reveal, spliced next to Daniel's recorded confession, played on a local news loop for days. She trended, but not in the way she'd hoped. I didn't post about them. I didn't need to. The truth did the heavy lifting. My neighbors knew now, my colleagues, old and new, had reached out, some with apologies, some with quiet nods of respect, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. I just let the silence speak. That silence, it was peace. I never went back to the old house, not once. I drove past it once, windows down, hair loose in the wind, but I didn't stop. It sat there, polished and hollow like a pretty lie that no longer fooled anyone. Instead, I poured myself into this new space. I rented the studio from a retired bookbinder who appreciated silence as much as I did. I added presses, type blocks, drawers of fiber paper, tubes of ink in shades of plum and ochre and rust. On Saturdays, I opened the door to a handful of high school girls. I taught them letterpress and binding. We made folded books, paper stars, words that pressed deep into thick cotton pages. One girl, Maya, watched me set a plate for printing and said, "You're not afraid of anything, are you?" I paused, looked her in the eye. I used to be afraid of losing people who never really stood beside me. She didn't blink, just nodded, and I knew she understood. Now, I feared silence less than betrayal. I valued solitude more than shallow praise. And I finally saw what I'd never been taught. Family isn't always born. Sometimes it's chosen carefully, quietly, after the fire. That afternoon, as the sun softened over the brick wall outside, there was a knock at the studio door. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened it. Maya, my youngest cousin, stood there. Older now, steadier. Her eyes were red, but her shoulders weren't slumped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a brass key, worn at the edges. "I kept it," she said, her voice small. "You gave it to me when I was 16. Said, 'When you're ready to leave, what breaks you? Come find me.'" I hadn't remembered saying that, but maybe I had. I held out my hand. She placed the key in my palm. I smiled. She didn't leave. She stayed. Maybe they thought they'd erased me, that stripping me of titles, photos, documents, and names would leave me invisible. But all they did was clear the path. A path toward something mine. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who swore they were family? What helped you walk out of the fire with your name still intact? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, because sometimes the comeback isn't loud, it's just real.